The world is edging toward a moment many feared would never return. From Moscow tonight, a stark warning from the Kremlin that humanity is entering what it calls a dangerous new era. In just days, the last remaining nuclear arms control treaty between the United States and Russia is set to expire. New START, a Cold War-era safeguard that limited the world's two largest nuclear arsenals and provided transparency, inspections, and restraint. Now that restraint is about to vanish. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov says once the treaty expires, the world will be more dangerous than ever before.
You are aware that the initiative from the Russian side, which was outlined by President Putin, is still very much on the table. We have still not received a response from the Americans regarding this initiative. Indeed, time is already shrinking like shag green leather, and in just a few days, the world will likely find itself in a more dangerous position than it has been until now. In fact, for the very first time, the United States of America and the Russian Federation, these are the two countries that hold the world's most extensive nuclear arsenals now, will be left without a crucial foundational document that would limit and control these arsenals. We understand that this is very bad for global security, for strategic security. For the remaining days, our proposals will continue to be on the agenda. You are aware that our Chinese friends are opposed to this. Their nuclear potential is not comparable at the present time with either Russia's or the United States capabilities. But at the same time, it is critically important for us that when we are discussing the future system of strategic stability, we cannot possibly abstract ourselves from the nuclear potentials of the United States allies in Europe, specifically Great Britain and France. Without addressing this, any further discussions will certainly be impossible.
President Putin has also spoken about this on multiple occasions.
For the first time in more than half a century, Washington and Moscow could be left with no binding limits on their nuclear weapons. Russia says it offered a one-year extension, but claims the United States has not responded. And in Moscow's words, the lack of an answer is also an answer. The treaty, signed in 2010 by then Russian President Dmitry Medvedev and U.S. President Barack Obama, capped deployed strategic nuclear warheads at 1,550. It survived years of tension, but not the war in Ukraine. Inspections were suspended during the pandemic. Talks collapsed. And in 2023, Russia froze its participation, though it says it continued to respect the limits voluntarily. Now, Russian officials say they're ready for a world with no nuclear constraints. Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov says this is a new reality, and Moscow is prepared. Yet he warns that if the United States expands missile defense systems, including possible deployments near Greenland, Russia will respond with military countermeasures. The risks extend far beyond Russia and the United States. Arms control agreements built after the Cuban Missile Crisis have steadily collapsed, while rivalry deepens, and China, now the world's third largest nuclear power, remains outside formal arms talks. Former U.S. President Barack Obama has issued a rare public warning, urging Congress to act. He says allowing New START to expire would erase decades of diplomacy and could ignite a new nuclear arms race. Even Russia's former president Dmitry Medvedev says the world should be alarmed, warning the Doomsday clock could move closer to midnight.
Well, you understand why yourself, because it would undermine achieving results. This is a very sensitive area. I'm not saying this immediately means catastrophe and that a nuclear war will start, but it should still be a cause for concern for everyone. And these very clocks that are steadily ticking away in this case, it is quite apparent that they should start ticking faster again. Because it is perfectly evident to everyone that these potentials, the total number of warheads, and the deployed delivery systems. These are just strategic methods intended to manage the situation, but they are not sufficient to solve the problem as a whole. But still, it's a way to carefully authenticate each other's underlying intentions, if you will. Despite all the drawbacks, it is still an essential component of mutual trust. When such a formal treaty exists, it means there is a level of mutual trust. When it doesn't, it means that trust has been exhausted. And in fact, the situation we're finding ourselves in now is clear evidence of a crisis in international relations. This is absolutely obvious. This essentially signifies that Russia is operating in strict compliance with its established nuclear doctrine, and our head of state has consistently reaffirmed this position on numerous occasions. Currently, this doctrine is in effect as revised in 2024. In this nuclear doctrine, in the so-called fundamentals of nuclear deterrence, there is Article 19, which explicitly lists all the circumstances under which nuclear weapons may be used to counter more dangerous threats. That's it. Given that Russia has not used nuclear weapons, it means that such threats to our country have not arisen. That's the first point. And the second, so the wording has changed. And it's clear that the current version of the fundamentals of nuclear deterrence takes into account, to a greater extent, the consequences of the ongoing conflict and the emergence of new types of weapons. Nuclear weapons can now be used not only as a retaliatory measure to a nuclear strike, but also in response to the massive use of drones, missiles, and other means of delivering weapons. To put it in another way, the criteria for its use have become significantly more expansive. But this does not mean that in every such case, Russia or the Supreme Commander-in-Chief will automatically make the definitive decision to use it. Obviously, nuclear weapons are nuclear weapons. This is an exceptionally powerful weapon, and it poses a catastrophic threat to the future survival of all of humanity. But simultaneously, as has been said, repeatedly and consistently, if it comes down to the ultimate fate of the entire country, then there should be absolutely no uncertainty in anyone's mind. It seems to me that this is truly a significant and pivotal historical date. Well, our proposal still stands, and even the formal agreement has not yet expired, so if the American side wants to extend it, that can be done. But when we look back at the final outcome, we find ourselves in a situation, I started thinking about this too, my whole life, ever since the year 1972, has taken place under the broad umbrella of the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, regardless of the specific name it was given at the time. At first it was called SALT-Y, and it was formally signed and ratified on our Soviet side by Leonid Brezhnev, and on the United States of America's side by Richard Nixon. Then SALT-II came into the picture, still during the existence of the Soviet Union. Then came the first Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, known as START-I, which was a major bilateral agreement. Following that significant milestone, there was an interim treaty established to further address the complex issues of international security and arms control, anti-ballistic missile defense, and maintaining certain levels of capabilities, which was already concluded in the modern era, and then the 2010 treaty. So for almost 60 years, we have never had a situation where strategic nuclear capabilities were not limited by something. But now such a situation is possible.
Meanwhile, Russia confirms it is modernizing its nuclear triad, land, air, and sea-based weapons, while insisting it will not be provoked into an arms race. But as the clock ticks down to Thursday, one thing is clear. The nuclear guardrails that held for generations are coming off, and the world is watching as history approaches another dangerous crossroads.